Now boarding our first class Ultra Gold passengers. Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast that takes you on an extraordinary journey through the lives of others, where empathy knows no bounds. Your host, Neil Matthews, is absolutely thrilled that you're here. Please take your seat as we're about to take flight into season 16. Be sure to hold on tight, because Take Flight isn't just about the skies above. It's about the depths within. We'll dive headfirst into the stories of those who faced turbulence and yet found the strength to rise above it all. So grab your headphones and get ready to soar with us as we launch into season 16. Thank you for flying with us. Buckle up and let's take flight.
That is right. It is Other People's Shoes. Welcome in to Other People's Shoes. That's the way we start things, right? That's how we do things around here. From the captain's chair, I was trying to be flight-like. Don't we all want to be flight-like? I know there's some of us that still feel very much grounded. And I'm not talking about baby in the corner grounded. I'm talking about we've allowed things in our life to hold us back and to stop us right in our tracks. Today, don't worry, my friends and family. Don't worry. I have an amazing guest today that I think is going to call us out of that and really lift our wings, or maybe the wind beneath our wings, going to find our way to soar today, because I don't know about anybody else. I'm tired of being grounded. Nobody liked being grounded as a kid. My parents definitely didn't like me grounded as a kid. I love it when we get to talk to a mom. I just think there's such a sweetness, a true sweetness, when you get a chance to speak to a mother's heart. And I think we're going to hear that today. Welcome in my new friend from upstate New York, a train ride from Syracuse. I had to say that for Jody. Here she is, Judi. Judi, how are you today?
I am fine and dandy, Neil, but I'm actually from Schenectady, not Syracuse.
Well, like I said, you could take a train ride to get to Syracuse.
That's right. Yes. Personally, I'd rather drive, but the train is okay. If we're going to do a train ride, it'll be down to New York City.
When I hear train ride, it makes me think of San Juan Capistrano. It was the first time I'd ever been on a train, and I sat next to this girl named Tiffany, and I was so excited she let me hold her hand.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. That must have been pre-COVID.
Yeah. Oh, wait. This is... See, 1980. Well, in 1980, we'll just leave it at that. 1980 something. I remember the next day she ignored me at Foursquare. So, true story.
Because of her story. Or because of you, Neil?
To quote Taylor Swift, the prophetess Taylor Swift, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me." I might have messed that up. We're Swifties in this house, apparently. My wife and daughter have seen the movie Taylor Swift. So anyway, we're excited that you're here. I'm always excited to meet new friends. I'm always excited to hear people's stories. Before we get to your story, we have to settle on a couple of things. The first thing we have to settle on is, what style of shoe does Judi like to wear?
You know what, Neil? If I had a choice, I would pick my duck feet. Shoes or boots every time, probably.
That blends well out here in Oregon, because we are just like 2 hours, 2.5-ish hours, Eugene, which is the mecca of all things Oregon Ducks.
Well, then I'd fit in well out there.
You would fit in well. We should have rain soon. We'll see. Who knows? I mean, that's just the joy of Oregon, is 1 minute we could have 90-degree weather. The next minute we could have snow. The next minute we could have rain. Then we could have fall. It's just all 4 seasons could be all at once in 1 week. It's truly amazing here.
Does it make you all a little bit schizophrenic then?
Melancholy. I think that's the right phrasing there. Sometimes, like when the rain comes, it's just, it's miserable.
My oldest was on the staff at Evergreen in Olympia for a while, and your weather patterns were really hard for him.
Yeah, I think I heard years ago, outside of Utah, Salt Lake City, I think Seattle still has the highest death rate among folks, which is insane, because I think it is truly the weather. So anyway, on to this. I love the shoes choice. Now, I have to, again, here's the disclaimer, or here's the added bonus. I don't know if anyone else does this. I have done it a time or two. I get on Amazon and I type in kind of like a Google search. Lo and behold, one day I was kind of bored, tired of looking up my latest Amazon purchase, golf, etc., North Carolina stuff, whatever it may be, techie gear. I mean, these are some of the things I search. I thought, I'm going to search other people's shoes and see what comes up. So I'm actually going to do that to kind of recreate that right now. So I'm on Amazon on my computer, and I'm going to type in other people's. You think I know how to spell it really well because I write it all the time. Sometimes I misspell it. That happened there. So what happened is I start scrolling through, and I think think I even may have put in book or something of that nature. But lo and behold, I find you in your book. And I don't know why. I still to this day don't know how I found it, but I did. And I reached out to you and I said, I got to know more about this story because your book cover is so fascinating to me. It's just a pair of shoes. It's nothing frilly. There's no name brand shoes, and I'm a big name brand guy. There's nothing. It's just a kind of normal pair of shoes, and it's just sitting there. Can you help me understand the concept and the idea behind that book cover?
I always knew I wanted a pair of shoes on the cover of my book. And my book title is Empty Shoes by the Door. And I have empty shoes by the door. My 18-year-old took his life 2 days before Christmas, my middle child, in 2011. And those were his favorite shoes. He wore them everywhere. And it signifies the fact that he never came back in the house to wear those shoes once he left via body bag. And those shoes will always be by the door, whether I live here or whether I live elsewhere. No one else can ever fill those shoes, not even Jesus.
Well, I think that's what's so interesting about your cover. When I saw it initially, it did remind me a little bit of when I first started my podcast. I was trying to find something that really encompassed other people's shoes. And I scoured Canva. That's what I used to create our artwork. And I scoured Canva hours on end looking at all kinds of different shoes because I had the name settled. It was going to be other people's shoes kind of from the beginning. I had this envision of what the shoes look like. I had the picture of it. I'm not an artist, so I can't draw. But in my mind, I've been told through the years, I can create in my mind a vision and a picture of something. And then usually I can articulate that out. When I found this picture, and I don't know who did it, I don't know where they came from. I probably don't even own the right to it, which I'm okay with. When I found it, it's just these ratty-tatty, looks like Vans tennis shoes. And there's nothing fancy about them. There's nothing that I know about them. They're pretty worn. And I remember going into a networking meeting, again, when I first started the show, and I remember this guy criticizing and ripping apart my artwork of the show. One, he said, my name's very small on it. If you ever look at it, it's very small and it's in the bottom right corner. And it's very, you almost miss it. And a lot of times when I put it out there, when I use that old logo and I put it out there, I actually will crop my name out of it on purpose. But in that, he said, there's nothing fancy about this. There's nothing eye-grabbing. It's just these shoes that are so prominent. And he goes, I think you're going to miss the moment for people. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I'm glad you're asking what I think because, I am the creator of it. And I said, here's the thing is I said, these shoes represent the person. These shoes represent who we're going to be into. Because again, I think, metaphorically speaking, shoes tell a lot about a person. Sometimes they're brand new and they look real nice, but they still smell on the inside. And sometimes they're rattered and tattered and they've walked some miles and they've been around the block a few times and they've have some stories that go with where they've been and what they've experienced. And to me, that's what I want to showcase in my show. And I had this lady chime in and she said, I'm weeping right now. Did you just come up with that? And I said, well, it's been on my heart for a long time, but yeah, sort of. She said, I think that is beautiful. Leave his artwork alone. I was like, high five, leave my artwork alone. Say that because that's what it reminded me of. All by a book cover. You had that power, by the way. And so I want to acknowledge that. Now, getting into your story and getting into really your son's story and what you guys have walked through, I'm curious about this for you. Hardest part on this journey has been what?
I'd say the hardest part on this journey, Neil, has probably been my realization that we often tell people that they need to run to the church at large, the body of Christ at large, for comfort and for encouragement. In many ways, that is not my story. Much of my wounding out of my son's suicide and much of my wounding in life since I've known the Lord has come from within the church. And in reality, my friends outside the body of Christ have often been kinder and less judgmental and less accusatory and more patient. And that was somewhat of a shock to me. That's not what we're told. I had written a Facebook post. I put up a post from a Jewish friend about just where you can send money for humanitarian issues in Israel. I had a family member who put up about why we should be supporting Palestine and all of that. And I was appalled because I wasn't trying to make a political statement. I was trying to make a humanitarian statement. And so I wrote about when Jensen died. Some of my Jewish friends were kinder than my Christian friends, were more supportive, more loving. It took me a while to realize that in many ways I was on my journey alone and I had to figure it out with God, that the people that I thought might help me figure it out were not always there or walked away. Suicide's a tough topic.
I think suicide to date is one of the hardest topics to talk about. We're no stranger to it. We've had a number of episodes, a number of moms. I think you're the third mom we've had talking about suicide of their child. This conversation never gets easier. It's not one I look forward to. It's not one I mark my calendar and go, okay, here we go. This is going to be a joyful episode. This is going to have so much grace and excitement. It's painful. It's the pain in life that we can focus on it or we can move past it. And I think that's the part I hear in your story is, yes, Jensen's passing has been very painful for you. But if you don't write this book, what happens to your life? What happens to the others that maybe need to hear your story that won't hear your story because you choose not to write it?
Suicide is tough, Neil, and you're right. You are right. It is not an easy subject. With all the suicide awareness and prevention materials and training we have and learning we have now, the numbers are still going up. It doesn't just happen outside of the body of Christ. The numbers are going up in the body of Christ. I couldn't find a me initial years of looking for someone to talk to find someone who I could say, tell me about your journey. I wrote my book wanting to be truthful and transparency. Those are really my brand, truthfulness and transparency, to be the person I couldn't find. And yes, the pain is terrible. I remember getting up off the floor when Brian told me that Jensen had taken his life, and I really felt like I'd gone to hell, that God had abandoned me. If hell truly is separation from God, that's what I felt like. And to figure out how to live through that for the rest of my days, knowing I'm now not going to see Jensen until I get to heaven, was a huge amount of work, was a tremendous amount of work. But I also knew that if I didn't do the work, that would be a second death and I would be of no value to my family or to anyone else. So I jumped into the darkness head first with all of its pain and all of its agony. I'm not going to ever see any redemption or recovery or anything until I deal with this. We can't ignore these things. People try. The carnage is always there.
You sound like a person of faith.
I am. Yes, I am a believer, follower of Jesus.
You know, God is all powerful for those that believe in the Bible. Omnipresent, all knowing, all seeing. He's the Alpha and the Omega, some would say. He's the beginning and the end. Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through Christ. So if Jesus is all these things and God's all these things, because they're one and the same for those that believe that portion of it, what if somehow God comes down and meets you at a Starbucks or meets you at a local coffee shop or a tea shop and he says, Judi, I'm going to give you for a week. You have all my powers. Kind of Bruce Almighty moment. Gives you all of his powers, all seeing, all knowing, all everything. How does Judi, knowing that she has God's power now for that week, how do you fix suicide?
I guess initially is to just not let it happen, to not let somebody take their life. I know you and I had this conversation via the phone. Is suicide self-murder? What are the consequences of that in the face of God when you take your life and then open your eyes? Where are you? The church at large, no matter what denomination you are, for years thought suicide was the unpardonable sin. And I suppose in some respects, when you take your life, you are murdering yourself. Murder is not an unforgivable choice. There are penalties, there are consequences, always consequences of our choices. If we know Jesus, we still go to heaven. If I could, being all powerful, if I could be God, I would come face to face with those people and show up in their lives and say, please don't do this. You have no idea what is going to happen in the aftermath of your choice, what it is going to do to people, your family, your friends. You have no idea that this is going to leave a life far worse than you thought you already had for the people who loved you. And I would try to explain that. And probably what I do, though, is take all the pain away that causes people to take their lives in the first place. It's a hard world. Let's face it. Wouldn't all of us rather be in heaven than here half time? No, more than half the time. Life is tough. Life is really difficult. If I could touch the person contemplating suicide, if I could touch their mental pain, their physical pain, whatever it is that causes them to take their life, I would take that away. They didn't think it was better to leave.
Do you feel in some way you failed as a mom? Is that a struggle?
Oh, that is. Guilt and shame are a huge legacy of your child's suicide.
Why? You didn't make the choice. Why do you carry that guilt and shame?
It's dwindled over the years because I realized that As time goes on, I have realized, Neil, we parents think we have so much control over our children. We think that we are God practically in our children's lives. We think that they're going to listen to us. We think that if we train them properly and do everything that we're told and have family devotions and take them to church and see that they know Jesus, we think we're going to protect them from all the things we weren't protected from as children. We homeschooled our children. We did everything that people told us were the right things for raising your children in a healthy environment so your children grow up as confident, well-rounded adults. And yet my son took his life. Neither my husband nor I, nor his friends, nor his girlfriend, none of us saw that it was even a possibility. Even my daughter said, I would have never thought Jensen would take his life. If anybody, it would have been, she said, her or her older brother. They just struggled in life a bit more than Jensen ever appeared to struggle. We think we should see these things. We blame ourselves because we think we somehow could stop it. But the reality is, as parents, we don't have control, especially as our children get older. We can't protect them forever. We can't make their environment safe forever. We can speak life into them, but they're going to grow up and make their own choices, often contrary to what we want for them. I think the guilt and the shame come in of other people thinking that somehow it's your fault that your child, their life. I can remember the youth group that Jensen went to was not at our church. It was at a different church. And that youth group leader went into the pastor of his church who knew our family. He was one of the care pastors after Jensen took his life for our family. Said, what's wrong in the Merriam family that Jensen took his life? That's where people's minds go. I am sure that that's where my mind went to, Neil. I'm sure in days gone past, before suicide affected my family, I would have thought the same thing. We do think our children are not going to do those things. Suicide never entered my mind for telling my children, don't take your life. It didn't occur to me that my children, who were well-rounded and intelligent and involved in so many things, that any of my children would make a choice to take their life. We don't have control of our children. They're going to make decisions that rock our world and change us forever.
The struggle I've had for years, and maybe you can help with this, is I think suicide is selfish. I think it's the most selfish act you can ever do. I myself have struggled, was younger in my middle school years. I mean, I can think of 3 different times that I not only tried, but planned it out, wrote it out, had the letter written. It took teachers, it took youth leaders, it took mentors coming around me. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't even Jesus. I think Jesus used those people because he's just that way. Or there was one guy in particular, his name was Brian. He actually turned me on to the band DC Talk back in the day. Clearly dating myself for those who know who DC Talk is. If you don't, you should go check it out. But I remember him giving me a cassette tape because I tried to take my life at a summer camp because I didn't want to go home. At home was way darker, way scarier. At camp, I was important. I was a somebody. I mattered. I had a part to play in our cabin. I was seen. I was validated. I was important. At home, I was none of those things. I was forgotten. I was left out. I was oftentimes pushed off to the side. I was a distraction. Those are the things I was feeling. And I remember that dark day at camp, taking a bunch of Advil thinking somehow that was going to kill me. It just made me really sick, obviously. Remember the car ride home, and Brian came home to my house to meet my parents. He was kind enough to jump in the car with me and talk with me the whole way home. And it was probably about a 90-minute drive. Fast forward, our church goes, and now I'm an adult, and this is a number of years back, but our church goes right back to that camp. And I'm there as a man now, not as a young boy. And I remember walking into the bathroom, the exact sink, the exact moment, like time traveled me back to that moment. And I just remember just weeping. Like, what could have been? What would have been? Have somebody, again, it's Advil, but what if it had been something else? I would never have been at that moment. Men's camps, Bible camps, whatever they may be, spiritual awakenings, when you have this mountaintop experience, undoubtedly 2 weeks later, everybody forgets everything that happened, all the commitments you made, all the promises you swore you were going to keep when you came back to reality. And I know that because I've been in youth ministry for a long time, and now I'm getting an opportunity to help out in our men's group at church. And so they asked the men at the end of the camp, hey, what are you going to take away? What are you going to implement back in your life? You know, this life-changing moment again. And nobody said anything. Everybody's kind of quiet. And so I raised my hand and I stood up and I said, guys, I don't want to forget what happened here today. And I told them about the story about me all those years ago in 8th grade. I bring that up, Judi. Jensen's name, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, is God is gracious. And to me, God is gracious in that moment for me. God is gracious in this moment for you. Bet right now somebody is hearing us talk and they're thinking, you know what, Neil, Judi, I don't know the God you serve. That's not the God I know. He is not gracious. He is not walking me through this valley of the shadow of death like he's promised. I don't remember hearing his voice. I don't remember him near me. This God you speak of, he's not gracious. He's not anything. I don't want anything to do with him. And I get that. But what would you say to that mom or that dad in that moment that has said, God is not gracious? What would you say?
I would say, I know exactly how you feel, even though grace at this point is my word. I understand God's graciousness so much more. The journey of pain after a child's suicide, the suicide of anybody we love, is not a simple fix. And we are wounded and we are scarred for the rest of our life. And there's a hole in our hearts that no one else can ever fill. Not even God, not even Jesus. That hole in our hearts is shaped like the child or the husband or the parent who died. No one else can fill that hole. And we have to figure out how to live with it. And the reality is suicide does not look like grace. Suicide does not look like God is gracious. Suicide doesn't look like any of that. And I struggled greatly with that. And I had to come to the decision that it was okay to struggle. People want us to be better. People want us to recover quickly. We don't talk about these things in the body of Christ. We don't talk about our anger against God. We don't talk about my faith is practically gone now. And so we have hurting people. We have people all the time who say in their heart, God is not gracious. I don't know who you serve, but then they walk around with smiles on their face. They think they have to because everybody expects them to. We are such fragile creatures. They're so fragile, Neil. The reality is that God already knows what we are thinking. He already knows our thoughts. Why wouldn't we tell him, I'm really angry with you. I want nothing to do with you. Just go away and leave me alone. He already knows that. I think I would tell that person, it is fine for you to admit that. It is fine for you to be angry with God. Just tell him that. When we speak that truth, when we say the things that we're thinking, I told God, Neil, probably about 5 months after Jensen died, when the shock had really worn off, and I was thinking about everything, I told God I hated him. And I wasn't struck dead. My world didn't come crumbling down around me. I already figured he probably knew that. I could speak it if I could say it out loud and yell it at him, that somehow maybe that was the beginning of finally figuring all of it out. Okay, I hate God. What am I going to do from here? And I drew a line in the sand at that point and said, I've done everything you told me I was supposed to do as a parent. You failed. You blew this. You're sovereign. You're all-knowing. You could have stopped my son's suicide. And by then, Neil, I was already hearing stories like you just shared with me. You took Advil, you didn't die. Other parents were saying, I'm so sorry. My child tried to take their life. They didn't because somebody intervened. And I think, wait a minute, God, why didn't you intervene for my son? I had to redefine some things. I knew when I drew that line in the sand that I was the one that was going to step across somehow to God. God was also stepping across somehow to me. And I can't explain it in the admitting of the anger and the hate and the rage and the disappointment and all of that. Speaking the truth allowed me to then start to see God in a different light and redefine some of the things that I had falsely believed about God.
I don't know how this happened. I met some folks that run a funeral home here locally. I was talking to them one day and I said, hey, do you guys ever come across a family that doesn't have someone that can speak on their behalf when their loved one has passed, like a pastor or a chaplain of some sort? And they said, yeah, actually more than you know. And I said, well, I just wanted to volunteer. If you guys ever run into that spot, I would love and be honored to speak on that family's behalf if they want it, they need it. They said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I think so. Yes. And they said, okay, hey, we'll keep you in mind. Well, what's your number? And so I gave it to them and that was kind of that. And I thought, well, that was cool. Put myself out there, God, for hurting people. Here we go. We'll see where this goes. And didn't hear anything for a while. And then all of a sudden, like a month or so goes by, my phone rings and I don't recognize the number, but I answer it and it's the funeral home. And they said, hey, we have a family. Can you meet with them? And I said, sure. Gave me the particulars, gave me their stuff. And so I met with the family and did their service. One service turned into 2, turned into 3. I think I'm up to like 5 now. Not that I'm keeping track. And I asked the family years ago, this when I was actually serving as a pastor. And I said, hey, what do you remember most about your loved one? And they would share a trait or a quality, something generally positive. I think to carry on their memory, I think you should take on that trait, that quality, that whatever it may be, and continue to put that out in the world so their memory never dies. Judi, I build that to ask this question. What's the one thing you remember most about Jensen?
The one thing, I think, if I may extend it to two things, every time he or I or Dad, my husband, or Jensen left the house, or we dropped him off somewhere, he would always hug us and always say, I love you, no matter what. Even the day he took his life. When I went out to go to my husband's business Christmas luncheon that day, now that he was already anticipating once we were gone, he was going to go take his life. We hugged each other and he said, I love you. And I said, I love you. I try to, on a regular basis, the people I truly, truly care about, tell them I love them when I walk away from them. We never know what our last words to somebody are going to be.
I'm struggling here. I just don't think people get the gravity of the last moment. I read the book The Shack years ago. Still hate that.
My favorite book, Neil. Changed my life probably more.
I hate it on some level, but I love it on others. One of the phrases that I stole from The Shack, and I hope one day I'll get to meet the author, a friend that actually got to interview him, and I'm still mad at him for that. Sean, still mad at you.
I asked him to write a blurb for my book. No, he didn't.
In The Shack, there's a phrase that he says that if all you can see is your pain, you'll never see me. That spoke to me probably more than anything in that book. At the time, I was going through some real painful stuff, and I had put a lot of it on myself. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. And in that, I read that phrase and I read it again and I go, God, I'm so mad at you. And he's like, why are you mad at me? You did this. You caused this. And as weird as this may sound, are you ever mad at Jensen?
Oh, yes, Neil. And that's part of this legacy. I think a week ago, I was telling my husband because of some family issues that continue on, especially with my youngest. She was 14 when Jensen took his life. That's a really fragile age, too. And the legacy that we now live with, the pain that we now live with. I just said to my husband last week, sometimes I'm still so mad at Jensen. And I can remember in the shock carries you. Shock's a great gift. It really is. It helps us function when we can't. When it starts to wear off, the reality sinks in. I can remember being so angry with Jensen, probably closer to the time I was so angry at God. And even standing in my hallway once after just some family issues of trying to function now in the wake of a suicide death. Excuse my language, said right out loud, Jensen, what the hell were you thinking? Because I don't know, Neil. And yes, when I see the carnage, when I see what's left behind, what Jensen's suicide has robbed this world of, the Jensen gifts, the filmography, his writing, all of that, his gift of humor, and the world will never know that now for the rest of his life. I'm angry. I get mad. I also know that I move out of that and move to okay, something was up, something was not working correctly in his brain. And we have an enemy. We have an enemy that wants to ruin us, that wants to take our families out, that wants to destroy everything. And I started to realize that the father of lies is the one to blame, but it took me a long time to get there. And even now when I get mad at Jensen, it's more, well, I know, Jensen, you're the one that caused this, even though you made the choice to take your life, that there was more behind the scenes that we never see.
Yeah. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about letting go of another one's throat.
That is so true, Neil.
That's from The Shack, by the way. I didn't come up with that. I'm not that brilliant.
No, I know. Yes. And you are so right. We are not taught that. We somehow, in nice, well-behaved Christianity where everybody's supposed to look perfect and have their lives orchestrated according to what we're told, we often say, well, you have to forgive and forget. But we can't forget. Our brains aren't designed to forget. And we might not always have it in the forefront. The pain is there, the things that happen to us. And we're not supposed to forget, Neil, because if we forget, then we don't have any record of looking back and seeing how God has worked in spite of the circumstances. So we can forgive somebody, yes. What they did will always be there. And we need to remember, just like you need to remember when you took Advil when you were 13, you now understand the pain. You probably are great with teens because you remember how painful it was to be a teen. If you had forgotten that, you wouldn't be able to be used by God the way you are now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope. It's the hope to make an impact, to make a difference, or help make some changes. How do you find your reason to rise? We're in the this flight series, this take flight moment. Has there been for Judi a take flight moment?
My mantra, and I have it tattooed on my arm in my book, and I have it on my Instagram and my Facebook. My mantra is by grace, I rise, and I rise because of God, because I jumped wholeheartedly into the darkness. And I think initially that was the moment. Somehow, by God's grace, even though I was a mess and a wreck, it had to have been God because it wasn't me, Neil. I somehow knew that if I didn't run full throttle into the darkness, I would never get to the light. We don't run away from the darkness to get to the light because then we don't find the light. We have to run into the darkness to get to the light. That's the fastest way to the light. So many people want to run from the darkness. So my, whatever you want to say, aha moment of at least realizing how I was going to begin some semblance of healing was to run full throttle into the darkness and accept it all and take every ounce of the pain and every stupid thing that somebody said to me and every doubt I ever had and admit it and wrestle with God. Like Jacob wrestling with God, just all of that. I knew that I had to wrestle. Aha moment of realizing that it was all by grace. It really wasn't about me as much as it was whatever I was going to learn, whatever redemption I was going to see, was probably after I had run into the darkness and started to see glimpses of redemption as I now moved forward.
Yeah, I think we all have to find that moment to say, am I going to stay here? And not that you were wallowing per se, but am I going to stay here or am I going to be above that? Am I going to find a way to find my voice? In this moment, I would say maybe even find our wings. So on that thread, pain has a way of clipping our wings, going back to the Shaq again. I'm finding all these amazing Shaq quotes. So here we are. Here's another one that I really like this one too. Probably equally, maybe better. But it says this. It says, pain has a way of clipping our wings and keeping us from being able to fly. And if left unresolved, you or me or whoever, you can forget that you were created to fly in the first place. Judi, you were created, I was created to fly, but yet turbulence comes, fear comes, complacency comes, suicide comes, whatever it may be, and we forget that we were designed and created to fly, and we stay grounded. What do you think the danger would be if you never ran, in your words, ran into the darkness? Have you ever thought about what life would have looked like? Because let me tell you, what I've heard from suicide, especially parents who have lost a child to suicide, undoubtedly, their marriage dissolves.
High divorce rate, yes.
I've heard that high divorce rate. You and your amazing husband, as you call him, I would echo that. I've never met him, but if he knows you, he's probably a pretty amazing guy. You guys stayed together. How?
Neil, I have to go back to the fact again, by grace, I rise, because I don't know how Brian and I knew to do certain things. I really don't. And that's why I have to attribute it to grace, to the grace of God, to somehow God working even when we couldn't see that he was working. How did we know things that other people can't seem to get to? I think right from the start, my husband and I gave each other the space to grieve the way we needed to. We didn't place expectations on each other. Somehow we knew that, probably because we kept talking, probably because we kept dialoguing, probably because we allowed each other to go as dark as the other needed to go. And my husband, for a very long time, was much darker than I was. Those are our personalities too. So much of grief is involved in our personalities. Took turns carrying each other when need be, but we also admitted to each other what we were feeling at that time. We didn't try at all to be better than we were. We didn't try to use all the nice little Romans 8:28 phrases on each other that people love to quote. None of that. So somehow I think, again, because we were honest and because we allowed each other to speak our present truth about our feelings about God and our faith without saying, well, that's wrong, or you can't think that, or wow, your faith is really small right now. None of those platitudes, none of those stupid things that people love to share, none of those, well, this is all part of God's plan, to each other. We just let it be what it was. And all I can say is that as I look back now, not knowing at the time, that was part of the mess that God cleans up, the redemption, the regeneration of the pain, not that God caused it, but that he then was in there letting us know what we needed to do. We read a lot of the same books. I read far more than my husband did, and we dialogued. We talked. We constantly talked about what we were feeling. And he never said to me, you should be better than you are. And I never said to him, you should be better than you are. We went to counseling together right away. I knew that was imperative. We needed to be somewhere. And the reality was that it was not a Christian counselor that helped us. He pretty much threw us under the bus trying to get an insurance intake when it was already paid for by friends. So it was a hospice counselor. And that's one of the things I'd like people to know, that often we don't think of going to hospice for a suicide death. It was the hospice counselor who was not presenting herself as a person of faith that actually gave us tangible, physical, mental things we could do to get through the first devastating weeks of the pain.
I think he's going to use anything he can to get our attention. And that is probably a little unorthodox. I would echo that. I think there is so much power in just having someone. Would never have thought of that. But hospice people, they deal with death day in and day out.
I was pretty adamant too, Neil, that we needed to, and that was the problem with this Christian counselor. He said he could deal with a suicide death he never had before. I was adamant. Somehow, again, by God's grace, I knew that we needed to find a counselor that had actually dealt with suicide. So this particular hospice counselor was trained. She's one who would go into schools after suicides and things like that. I never would have thought to look there, except for one of my son's friend's mothers was a nurse with hospice, and she knew this person.
I really think that's brilliant, truly. Wow. Well, Judi, as we start to wrap up today, I'm curious about this for you. How can folks go and get the book if they want to get their hands on it, if they want to read it themselves? And really, it's truly a memoir in a lot of respects. How can folks go and do that? What's the best way?
Well, you can order it from Amazon. I'm not a huge Amazon person like you, Neil. I like to look on Amazon and then go buy local. You may also order it from your local bookstore, which is actually where I prefer you go. You can order it from your local bookstore. If it's not sold locally, bookstores can order anything. It should be available there, but it is on Amazon. Always willing, Neil, to have people contact me. And you could Google my name. My website is on my Amazon book page. I want to always be the person that I could not find when I was looking for someone to talk to. That is what I do. That is part of my redemption out of this mess, is that I am willing to sit with a mom and listen. I'm willing to go into the ashes, to go to the depth, to listen to everything that a mom wants to say. And I'm willing to listen and not give my opinion unless asked. And that's huge because so many people want to give you their opinions, and opinions aren't necessarily correct. I'm always willing, as time allows, to talk to other moms, to talk to other people who have no idea where to even start after their child or their loved one has taken their life. And I truly love to do that. I truly understand the extent of the pain, how deep it goes, and how hard any semblance of recovery is afterwards.
Well, Judi, I think that's powerful that you want to be there for people in their pain, because I think so many times there are people that when it gets too painful or too messy or too yucky, that's a big word, right? I like it, yucky.
I use it a lot.
You know, I remember when my daughter was younger and she was still kind of in that awkward stage between diapers and potty training. There were a lot of yucky moments. And I remember her even saying in her cute little mousy voice, "Daddy, yucky." I'm like, yes, yucky. And I think so many times people, when it gets yucky and it gets smelly and it gets stinky, they're like, I don't want to get my hands dirty. I'm out. I love the fact that you're saying, no, when it gets the yuckiest, my hand is up. Here I am. Send me. And I think that's powerful. Now, I'm going to be a little facetious here. I know you're a little older than I am. I think we established you're probably old enough to be my mom, if I remember correctly.
We did figure that out, Neil.
Okay, we did do some math on that. I thought we did somewhere in our journeys together. In this mom moment, you're nervous about being here. You forgot one place people can go to get the book, and it's okay. I mean, I get it. It's nerves probably today being here. It's also going to be available at opspodcast.com/books that I love. It'll be up towards the top, and we will feature it there on our website as well. Fun stuff there. So speaking of fun stuff, we like to end the show with this silliness called Senseless. Now, these 6 random questions. Don't worry, you don't have to answer all 6. People are always afraid of that. So we make it random. The reason why we make it random is I in a cup, and that's what makes the randomness to it. So anyway, we have brand new questions this season. They're all flight-related questions. We worked long and hard. We put the research team on it. They came up with some creative flight-type questions. Before we do that, I want to just give one maybe opportunity right now. I have a feeling there is a mom right now that is either A, worried about their teen. I mean, there isn't a mom out there or a dad out there right now that I don't think isn't worried about their teen. And if they're not, they're they're probably not a true parent. I'm just going to put that out there. What would you say to the mom or the dad that has a teen right now? What would be your motherly advice to them if you could give some?
If I could go back, Neil, and do a do-over.
A mulligan, as they call it in golf.
Yes, I would talk to my children more about mental health issues. I would talk to my children about suicide. We think that if we avoid it, then it won't put the thoughts in their head. No, those thoughts are already there. This world is really hard, and it's a harder world for teenagers now, I truly believe, than when I was a teenager. It's really tough. I love teenagers. I worked with teens for 23 years in musical and theater. So many times they don't feel like their parents really listen to them, and it's not safe to talk about things because parents overreact. And when we overreact, our teens don't want to tell us things because they do really love us and they don't want us to worry or be afraid or have more to carry. Tell the moms, be a safe place for your children to tell you absolutely anything, and don't overreact no matter how much work it is, no matter how much you're screaming on the inside. Tell them suicide is not the answer, but make it safe to talk to you about these things, because you're probably going to be their first person to go to if they know you are safe.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is creating a safe environment for everyone where there's no judgment, there's no threat of grounding, there's no threat of, I'm going to take your device away. That is the key. Really create that dialogue. And if you don't have that dialogue, you probably need some help working on that. Well, let's do our silliness. This is senseless, as I said. 6 random questions. So here we are. I got a cup. Just happen to have one just sitting around here, and a die inside. As you can see, there is a die. There's proof. All right, I'm shaking up really well for you and not rolling it off the desk. You got number 5. There it is.
Okay.
Light blue 5, as you can tell. We're brand color here. All right, number 5 is this. You find yourself sitting in first class. I don't know if you've ever flown first class, but here you are. You got upgraded, Judy. You find yourself sitting in first class next to someone famous. Who would you want it to be?
Oh, wow. Who would I want it to be? Oh, gosh, Neil, there's so many people I would love to sit down and have a cup of coffee with. I say that over and over and over again.
It's always in this moment people draw a blank.
How famous do they have to be, Neil?
I don't care. Your mind of famous and my mind of maybe, it's your choice.
Well, I was a voice major in college. I was a music major. I would like to sit next to Renee Fleming, who was in my studied voice with the same teacher that I did, but she was so far superior to us that she went on to be a world famous opera singer. And I would love to just sit with her and chat, because we're now way past college age, and I would like to find out more about her life and what she actually did, and also when she's going to stop singing, because I need to know, because I don't want to be one of those people that should have stopped singing years ago and people don't want to hear, so that you wish would shut up. So I would choose Renee Fleming, because I'm getting near that age, Neil, where maybe I should think, should I still be singing?
I mentioned a friend of mine who's from upstate New York. She's down in Cary, North Carolina now. Her name is Jodi Howell. And actually, she's come out with a book recently called The Air That I Breathe. She was told as a child that she could be the next Whitney Houston, Celine Dion, all these things. And she sings very well. I mean, she actually sang for a project for my mom that I did a number of years back for my mom's birthday. I had a number of voices that my mom has influence poured into these voices, and so they all wished her a happy birthday, and then a trait or a quality that they really loved about my mom, and I recorded it all and I meshed it all together, and they're all random.
You're a good son, Neil. I'll adopt you.
Thank you. I'm always looking for my real mom. Are you my real mom, Judy? Anyway, I thought it was pretty cool. I called it Voices of Hope, and Jodi sang the first part of it. She did it a cappella, and it was fantastic. And so I would tell you, and I think Jodi would also say this if you knew her, which you would love her. She would say, keep singing, because much like your writing, you cannot deny the world your voice. But Judy, I do want to say this before we go. I want to say thank you. I know what you talked about was very emotional. I know even still, I know it's not an easy conversation, as we already talked about. I truly want to say it has been an gosh darn it honor to have met you. And who knew just an Amazon search would bring me to your door. And I am forever grateful for whatever I typed in that day. I still don't, because I can't recreate it. I've tried. And I do believe that was an ordained thing.
Those are the moments. I call them glimpses of redemption, GORs, when I actually realized that you weren't a creepy guy who was just emailing me out of nowhere.
Well, I might still be that guy. I don't know.
I thought, okay, this is one of those GORs, those glimpses of redemption that remind me that my son's suicide is not for naught and that God works even when we don't think he's working. It's another place for me to share hope and grace and encouragement to anybody else who might be walking the same path.
Well, and again, I think that's so powerful. Thank you again, Judi. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Neil.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, I'm not crying, you are. Okay, I'm crying a little bit. It's these moments that get me, you guys. It's these moments that I don't take for granted when I hit record. It's these moments that I sit down at the desk and I think, what are we walking into? Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm surprised. I want to go back to that statement that I read from. Pain has a way of clipping our wings and keeping us from being able to fly. And if left unresolved, we can almost forget that we were created to fly in the first place. You were created to fly. You were made to be so much more. I love penguins, but they're never going to fly. And I know this may sound counterintuitive for those that know me personally. Don't be a penguin today. Don't be afraid to fly. Don't look up and think, man, I wonder what it's like to fly. Because I wonder sometimes if the penguin is jealous of the other birds that can fly. So yeah, I know it sounds weird, but don't be a penguin today. Be so much more. Soar, fly. But hey, listen, if you want to be a penguin, it's cool. You can stay on the ground. You can stay stuck. But I'm going to tell you, that's not who you are. Don't forget, do not ever forget this. Remember, when we walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. And stay tuned until next week when we walk in other people's shoes.